Here is a story that almost nobody in the mainstream royal press is telling properly. Not because the information is hard to find, not because access to the documents is restricted, because the information requires you to actually read a budget spreadsheet, cross-reference government contracts across 2 countries, and sit with some numbers that are genuinely uncomfortable once you understand what they mean. It requires work, and most of the people paid to cover this story have not been willing to do it. Tonight, we are going to do exactly that. Because buried inside public documents, charity commission filings, and freedom of information requests, there is a financial picture of the Invictus Games that looks nothing like the glossy narrative the official communications machine has been selling. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let's start with a document. Somewhere inside a government office in British Columbia, there is a contract signed in March 2023. It commits 15 million Canadian dollars of provincial taxpayer money to support Prince Harry's Invictus Games. The contract has an appendix, Appendix A, where the line-by-line budget breakdown is supposed to live, where every dollar of that public money is supposed to be accounted for in writing. That appendix is entirely blacked out. Not partially, not with a few lines redacted for privacy reasons. Every single figure, on every single line, page after page of solid black ink, standing exactly where the public's right to know used to be. A commercial airline pilot and former medical finance professional in the United States found that document, published it, and asked her followers to put pressure on the Canadian government for the unredacted version. 3 hours later, 3 hours, the Invictus Canada website went down. When it came back up, the document was gone, removed, and the website had been restructured so that anyone wanting to access Invictus financial documents now had to log in with a Dropbox account so the organization could track exactly who was looking. That is not the behavior of a charity that is comfortable with its own books. So tonight, source by source and number by number, we are going to walk through what the people running this organization are working so hard to keep redacted. You are going to know the names, you are going to know the numbers, and you are going to understand why a charity built on the backs of wounded soldiers cut its direct support to veterans by 63% in a single year, while its own income climbed by 41% in that exact same year. Let me introduce you to the woman who started pulling this thread. Her name is Rachel Maxwell. Remember it, because in the months and years to come, Rachel Maxwell is the name that future writers will point to as the moment the financial mythology around the Invictus Games started to crack. Rachel Maxwell is not a tabloid journalist. She is not a royal correspondent with a palace agenda to serve or a tabloid contract to protect. She is a commercial airline pilot with a serious professional credential, and before she flew aircraft, she worked in medical finance. She knows how to read a budget. She knows how to read a balance sheet. She knows how to spot the exact moment where the numbers stop matching the narrative. She runs an Instagram account called Montecito Minimalist and a YouTube channel called Rachel the Co-Pilot. And she got into this story in the simplest possible way. She kept waiting for someone in the professional press to actually break down where the Invictus money was going. She waited and waited, and nobody did it. So she decided to do it herself, working alongside Paula Froelich, an American journalist who runs the Substack newsletter The Scoop and produces video for the American network News Nation. Maxwell began cross-referencing publicly available documents, UK charity commission filings, Canadian government contracts at federal and provincial level, the Invictus Games Foundation's own published annual reports. She built a spreadsheet, she did the maths, and she filed freedom of information requests for the figures that had been redacted. This is not opinion journalism. This is not anonymous sourcing. This is a woman with a finance background reading public documents and asking why the numbers don't add up. And so far, no one in the official Invictus communications operation has produced a competing explanation that actually addresses the underlying figures. The response has been silence, a pulled website, and a login gate. 2 American women with no royal soap opera to fight, no tabloid contract to protect, and no access arrangements with palace communications teams to worry about, are doing the financial work that an entire generation of credentialed royal correspondents declined to do. And what they found is changing the conversation in real time. They are not working alone. Investigative author Tom Bauer, in his book Betrayal, made specific written allegations that Invictus funds had been directed toward private jet travel, 5-star hotel accommodation, and personal transportation for Harry and Meghan. Bauer has spent decades as one of Britain's most rigorous investigative biographers. His subjects have included Robert Maxwell, Conrad Black, Mohammed Al-Fayed, and Tony Blair. When Bauer puts a claim in print, it has been vetted, lawyered, and double-sourced before it leaves the editor's desk. Those allegations have, to my knowledge, never been successfully challenged in court. The book sits in libraries and bookshops around the world. The claims sit on the page, unchallenged. If Palace Insider is giving you the picture that other channels skip, hit the like button. It helps us reach more people who want the real story. Now let's get into the numbers, because this is where the story really lives. The Vancouver and Whistler edition of the Invictus Games, held in February 2025, had a closed budget of 63.2 million Canadian dollars. 543 veterans competed. Divide one by the other, and you arrive at approximately $118,352 per veteran competitor. $118,000 per person, per wounded soldier who walked through those gates. Rachel Maxwell put that figure better than anyone could. Would the veterans have preferred that money in a different form? New prosthetics? A wheelchair-accessible home renovation? A specially adapted vehicle? That is not a rhetorical question. That is a genuine question about priorities. Here is the context that makes that number even harder to sit with. The United States Department of Defense runs its own annual sporting competition for wounded American service members, the Warrior Games. Harry attended the Warrior Games in Colorado Springs in 2013, was moved by what he saw, flew home, and founded the Invictus Games as a direct international expansion of that concept. The Invictus Games is, in a very direct sense, the child of the Warrior Games. Without the Warrior Games, there is no Invictus Games. That lineage is documented, and Harry has acknowledged it publicly. What does the parent cost? The Warrior Games runs annually at an estimated $2 to $10 million, depending on which authoritative source you consult. Even at the highest end of that range, the Warrior Games costs the United States taxpayer roughly 1/6 of what the Vancouver edition cost in a single event, not 1/6 per year over a decade, 1/6 in a single year, for a single edition. Germany has its own adaptive sporting competition for wounded service members. The German edition costs approximately $200,000 per event, not per competitor, per event. That is less than the cost of 2 individual competitors at Vancouver, less than 2 people. And then there is the original, the London 2014 Invictus Games. 300 competitors from 13 nations, founded by Prince Harry himself with the specific purpose of honoring wounded veterans through sport, had a total budget of a few £100,000. A few $100,000. 12 years and 7 editions later, the Birmingham edition planned for 2027 is projected to cost up to £60 million. Same stated mission, same founding purpose, same founder, scaled by a factor that no serious charity analyst can explain purely through inflation, operational growth, or increased participation numbers. Paula Froelich's question is the only one that matters here. What exactly does the extra money buy? Because the Warrior Games delivers a comparable experience at a fraction of the cost, the German edition delivers a comparable experience at a microscopic fraction, and the original London edition delivered the same mission at a fraction of a fraction. Something has expanded very significantly. The question, the only honest question, is what? Now let's look at the Invictus Games Foundation itself, the British registered charity that owns and licenses the Invictus brand globally and sits at the center of the entire financial structure. The foundation filed its 2024 annual accounts with the UK Charity Commission after a 2-year grace period, 2 years late. In the world of serious charity governance, annual accounts are not optional or flexible. They are a legal requirement, a public accountability mechanism, and a basic signal of institutional health. A charity of this profile, handling tens of millions of dollars of public money across multiple sovereign jurisdictions, filing 2 years late is not a minor administrative inconvenience. It is a flashing warning light. When those accounts did finally land in the public record, the numbers were not the numbers the official communications team would have chosen for the front page. In the year covered by those accounts, the foundation cut its direct grants to veteran organizations by 63%. The actual figures as filed with the Charity Commission, grants fell from £534,973 to just £200,328. a drop of more than £300,000 in money flowing directly out of the foundation and into the hands of the actual veteran organizations doing the actual work on the ground. Cut by nearly 2/3 in a single year at a charity whose stated mission is supporting veterans. And in that exact same year, the foundation's own income rose by 41%. Money pouring in at the top, money to veteran organizations cut by nearly 2/3 at the bottom. So where did the difference go? Because the difference has a destination. Charity money does not simply evaporate between the income line and the grants line. In that same year, the foundation added a new six-figure executive role. Cash reserves grew to approximately $2.9 million, and the highest-earning staff member was paid somewhere between $153,000 and $166,000, above the standard pay band for the chief executive of a UK charity of comparable size and scope. Sit with the shape of that year for a moment. Direct support to veterans down by nearly 2/3. Income up by more than 40%. New executive role added. Growing cash reserves. Above market top salary. These are not the numbers of a charity in financial difficulty making hard decisions about where to cut. These are the numbers of a charity that has, somewhere along the way, started organizing its priorities differently from how it presents them in public. Now here is what is happening in real time. In the days immediately before you are watching this. Boeing, the largest, loudest, most institutionally significant corporate sponsor in the entire Invictus portfolio, has walked away, quietly, without fanfare, but decisively. A global aerospace giant performing a full and final exit from Prince Harry's flagship charity. That is not a routine sponsorship reshuffle. That is a signal. And it is not only Boeing. Reports from the organizers themselves indicate the foundation is struggling to fill major roles ahead of the Birmingham 2027 edition. Senior positions, the kind that should draw credentialed candidates immediately, sitting open and unfilled. Then this past week, Melanie Poole, a name most casual royal watchers would not immediately recognize, but a name that anyone working in serious British charity governance knows immediately. Poole was a trustee and vice chairman of the board for the Birmingham 2027 edition. Her career included senior roles at the Heritage Lottery Fund, the National Lottery Charities Board, and her current role chairing the Florence Nightingale Foundation. This is not a figurehead. This is not a celebrity board appointment. This is a serious, deeply credentialed governance professional with a career built on lottery-funded charitable oversight at the very highest levels. She resigned, quietly, without public explanation. Paula Froelich, the journalist closest to this story, wrote directly in her newsletter, "I wonder if Miss Poole is leaving before the inevitable investigations and audits of Invictus money begin." That is a working journalist on the record in her own publication, asking whether one of the most respected governance figures in British charity has just headed for the exit ahead of something she can see coming. Then there is Australia. Listen to this carefully because what happened in Canberra is one of the most extraordinary signals in this entire story, and it has received almost no analysis proportionate to its significance. Invictus Australia had been receiving roughly $9 million in annual Australian federal government funding. That funding was due to expire. Renewals of this kind, for an organization of this profile and this political visibility, are almost always routine. They get renewed quietly, without drama, as part of the normal budget cycle. The expectation across the sector was that the renewal was essentially confirmed. The Australian government simply did not renew it. The Albanese government, in its most recent federal budget, left the Invictus renewal out entirely. The chief executive of Invictus Australia, Michael Hartung, said his organization was given only minutes of notice before the budget announcement went live. He described his organization as deeply shocked and disappointed. Now here is the detail that makes this genuinely extraordinary. That same budget included an additional $14 billion in new defense spending over 4 years. $14 billion. The same budget that found $14 billion for defense could not find $9 million for Invictus. And this was also a budget that included more than $770 million in new funding tied to the recommendations of Australia's Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. A budget that was, on every other measurable dimension, generous to veterans, generous to defense, generous to the men and women who served. Just not to Invictus. The Australian government has the intelligence resources of a serious Five Eyes partner. It has access to information about organizations operating within its funding frameworks that the general public does not have. It looked at the Invictus organization, looked at the questions accumulating around its finances, and without comment, without public explanation, without a press release explaining its reasoning, drew a line through a renewal that the entire sector had assumed was a sure thing. You do not have to be a diplomatic expert to read that signal. The Australian government just told you something about what it thinks it knows. It told you quietly, precisely, and without leaving fingerprints. That is how serious governments communicate when they want to send a message without starting a public fight. Before we continue, subscribe to Palace Insider and drop a comment below because the conversation this week has been seriously good. This is not the first Prince Harry charity to find itself in this territory. It is the second. And the first collapsed in public view just over a year ago. Instability, the charity Harry co-founded in 2006 to support children in southern Africa affected by the HIV crisis, was for many years the single most compelling argument that Harry was a serious man with a serious humanitarian mission. It was genuinely impactful work in a genuinely difficult context. And for years, it served as the clearest evidence that his public reputation for caring about vulnerable people was more than performance. In early 2025, the entire governance structure imploded publicly. The board chair, Dr. Sophie Chandauka, publicly accused Harry and the trustees of bullying. The board collapsed. Harry stepped down as patron of his own founding charity, a charity he had started specifically to honor his mother's legacy. He stated that his relationship with the chairman had deteriorated beyond repair. The Charity Commission of England and Wales launched an inquiry. By some accounts, that inquiry remains ongoing. So when you look at the Invictus situation now unfolding, the resignations from senior governance figures, the public questioning of financial priorities, outside scrutiny intensifying, major funding partners walking, you have to look at it against the Instability backdrop. Because this is not a brand new pattern in an otherwise clean record. This is the same pattern appearing in a second charity with different names attached. The Instability collapse was not a one-off incident. It was a warning. And the Invictus situation may be the place where that warning lands with its full weight. Tom Bauer's specific written claims in betrayal that Invictus funds had been directed toward private jet travel, five-star hotel accommodation, and personal transportation for Harry and Meghan remain unchallenged in court, to my knowledge. They sit in a published book sold worldwide. They have been read by a major publisher's legal team. They have not been retracted or corrected. That is not a small thing. In the world of serious investigative publishing, that is a significant thing. Now let's talk about the structure, because this is the part that most royal commentators have completely missed, and it is the most important single insight in this entire story. It explains why the financial questions are so difficult to answer, and it explains why that difficulty is not accidental. The Vancouver and Whistler edition was not directly funded by the Invictus Games Foundation. It was funded through a separate Canadian not-for-profit, the Vancouver Whistler Games Corporation. That corporation received the public money, federal, provincial, and municipal funds, plus corporate sponsorship and private philanthropy. Then it paid a licensing fee to the Invictus Games Foundation in the United Kingdom for the right to use the Invictus brand and run the event under that name. How much was that licensing fee? The figure is blacked out in every publicly available government contract document. Redacted, just like Appendix A in the British Columbia contract. Just like every other line where a curious airline pilot with a financial background has had to file Freedom of Information requests just to hope to see the underlying numbers. So the question is clear. How much of the $63.2 million Canadian dollar budget left Canada and crossed the Atlantic into the Invictus Games Foundation's bank accounts in London? We do not know. The figure has been deliberately removed from the public record. And here is why that matters structurally, why this is the most important architectural feature of the entire operation. Once that licensing fee arrives in London, it is no longer public Canadian money. It is private UK charity revenue, subject to the broad discretionary rules of charity law and whatever the foundation's trustees deem appropriate to spend it on. The accountability mechanisms in Canada cannot follow the dollar across the ocean. The UK Charity Commission only sees the inflow, not its origin in Canadian taxpayer funds. This is a one-way valve. Public money from sovereign taxpayers flows in on one side. Private discretionary charity money flows out the other. And whoever designed this licensing structure between the Vancouver Whistler Games Corporation and the Invictus Games Foundation understood exactly what they were building. A charitable architecture in which sovereign taxpayer money in one country becomes private discretionary spend in another country, with each jurisdiction able to credibly state that its own accounting is in order, while no single jurisdiction can see the complete picture. When Rachel Maxwell asks where the licensing fee actually goes, the answer she runs into is a wall of redacted paper on one side of the ocean and a private charity's discretionary spending on the other. That is not a gap that arose by accident. That is a gap that was designed into the structure. The Veterans Affairs Canada audit adds one more data point. The Canadian government withheld a final holdback payment of 750,000 Canadian dollars and recovered approximately 447,888 Canadian dollars from the host corporation based on the post-event audited accounts. That is not necessarily a fraud finding. Standard surplus recovery happens at the end of any large public grant arrangement, but it confirms that even after the books balanced on paper, there was money the Canadian government had advanced that did not need to be spent, and the Canadian government quietly took it back. So here is the complete picture. A charity started 12 years ago on a few £100,000, now operating at over $60 million per edition, at a per-veteran cost of $118,000, while the program that inspired it runs at roughly 1/6 of the cost. A foundation that filed its accounts 2 years late, cut direct veteran grants by 63%, while its own income rose by 41%, added executive roles and grew its cash reserves. A redacted budget appendix. A website taken down within 3 hours of a whistleblower publishing the document. A Dropbox tracking system installed on financial downloads. Boeing walking away. A senior governance trustee resigning quietly. Australia withholding $9 million in a budget where it found $14 billion for defense. Emails to the foundation from credentialed journalists at 2 separate news organizations going unanswered. You can call any individual piece of this coincidence. You can extend Harry every benefit of every doubt, and that is your right. But Rachel Maxwell, Paula Froelich, Tom Bauer, Melanie Poole, the Australian federal government, Boeing, the Veterans Affairs Canada auditors. These are not random voices. These are credentialed, on-the-record, professional observers. And every single one of them is sending the same signal at the same time. Something is not adding up. The people who should be asking the questions are running out of polite reasons to look the other way. The next time you see a beautifully shot Invictus fundraising video, the next time the PR machine rolls out another glossy magazine spread about Harry's noble legacy project, remember the airline pilot in the United States. Remember the redacted appendix. Remember the 63% cut to veteran grants in the year the foundation's own income rose by 41%. Remember the resigned trustee, the departed sponsor, the Australian budget line that simply was not there. Every great charity has a moment when its accounting catches up with its mythology. The Invictus Games is approaching that moment right now, and the people who asked the early questions are going to be remembered as the ones who did the work the rest of us were too distracted or too charmed to do ourselves. Do you think there needs to be a full independent audit of Invictus finances? And do you think, given everything we have just walked through, that it will ever actually happen? Drop your answer in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you do not miss what comes next on this story, and a like really does help us reach more people. See you in the next one.